Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. Ethan had only recently become the manager of the restaurant. Before that, the establishment had belonged to his father, who had decided to retire from business due to poor health. Once before the financial boom of the 90s, Richard worked there as an assistant cook. It was later, thanks to his determination and love for gourmet cuisine, he became the first fiddle of the restaurant. His dishes were always a great success with the customers, which in turn made a quite tangible contribution to the total treasury. When global changes began in the country, Richard did not abandon the restaurant and worked in it even when, due to poor funding, it turned into a regular canteen for little reason. Unlike his colleagues, who were looking for better places, the man survived all the hard times and, having saved up money, one day became the owner of this restaurant. Of course, for someone, the transformation of a chef into the owner of an establishment will seem unbelievable. But at that time, more shocking metamorphosis happened to the people, caused by global changes in the country. Because Richard spent most of his free time in the restaurant, he started a family rather late in life. His friends and acquaintances considered him a confirmed bachelor, not even guessing that deep down inside the man dreamed of a family and a child. Family ties Richard bound himself to quite a mature age, and the marriage turned out to be conscious and strong. The experienced businessman became a father at 45, when many of his friends were getting ready to go to their sons' or daughters' graduation parties. Ethan grew up an obedient and intelligent boy, which could not but please his father. He began to speak early, after which he moved pretty quickly into reading books, which over time turned into a real hobby for him. Thanks to his father, Ethan received a good education in his own country, not abroad, as was customary among the business class. You don't need to sit around in those Harvard and Yale schools. You have to live here anyway, so you'll have to study here too, Richard instructed his son. Ethan did not forget his father's science, and after graduating from the economics department of the local university, set out on the slippery slope of a fledgling businessman. By that time, Ethan's mother died suddenly of a heart attack, and Richard's own health problems began to show on a nervous breakdown, so he had to look for a replacement as a matter of urgency. Having tried all possible candidates, the businessman chose his son. Despite his apparent youth, Ethan had the business acumen that was simply necessary in any business. Becoming the owner of the restaurant, the guy did not reconstruct everything to his liking and change the employees who had been working there for several years. The only thing that bothered Ethan was that with his arrival, the restaurant's losses increased dramatically, which had never been before. Trying to figure out the reason, the young businessman had several conversations with the staff, but the losses were still consistently high. I do not understand what it is. On paper, everything seems to add up, incoming and outgoing, but in reality, everything is different, Ethan told his administrator once again, studying the reports. Victor was a man with great ambition and secretly envied his more successful boss. So to his eyes, he told Ethan only flattering lies, and behind his back he criticized him as much as he could. It is hard to say whether the newfound owner of the restaurant knew about such unflattering behavior of his subordinate or not. But the fact remained the fact. Losses continued to grow, and the culprit, as before, was not found. The lad did not want to turn to his father with this problem. For one thing, Richard's health was still not good, and secondly, Ethan wanted to find out for himself. After all, if he needed help to solve problems now, in the future things would become even more difficult. Ethan, can I make you some coffee? Ethan, the young waitress asked as she opened the door of the owner's office. Yes, Angela, I won't refuse, answered the young businessman. With cream, as usual? Yes. And 1 spoonful of sugar, please. After seeing the waitress off, Ethan turned his attention back to his paperwork and reports. He sensed that the solution was close at hand, but all he had to do to reach it was to pull the right string. But the only problem was how to choose this very thread, which, like the creation of the mythical Ariadne, would lead him to the right place. The door of the restaurant owner's office opened again, and Angela appeared on the threshold with a tray with a cup of coffee and a saucer with the freshest croissant. "Thank you, Angela," Ethan said without raising his head. The waitress put the tray on the table and froze in indecision. "Anything else?" asked the businessman. Angela hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to tell Ethan something that might seem strange or even shocking to him. "Ethan, there. I don't even know how to say it." "Well, you'd better see it for yourself," Angela answered, embarrassed by her own words. Ethan looked at the waitress with surprise and got up from the table. Angela had always been a lively girl. Not everyone could embarrass her. She, like nobody else, knew how to make eyes at clients to squeeze as much as possible tips out of them. And then suddenly she was as shy as a high school girl on a first date. What the hell was going on in there? Did she see a ghost? Followed the waitress, Ethan thought. When the businessman finally entered the hall, he saw something strange indeed. The reason for Ethan's surprise was the fact that next to the reception desk stood a boy of about 6 years old, holding in his hand a rather shabby canvas bag. The boy's appearance was so pathetic that Ethan's heart ached. The boy's clothes looked old and had obviously been taken off someone else's shoulder. His pants, tucked up several times, would probably have fallen off his skinny body if they hadn't been supported by a sash, apparently taken from a woman's robe. The boots were at least 2 sizes too big, which made the boy look more like Little Mook from the cartoon of the same name than a junior in high school. The burnt jacket also left a lot to be desired, which could not but cause pity to those around him. The administrator, Victor, stood next to the boy, and his face was clearly marked with disgust and arrogance. It was obvious that the man did not care about the boy, who had wandered into an expensive restaurant for some unknown reason. A little further away stood Lucas the doorman, who had served first in the police force and then in the current police force. After retiring, the man could not sit idly by, and as surprising as it sounded to his former colleagues, took a job as a doorman in a restaurant. On the whole, he liked his job. Stable high wages, a gentle schedule, and the opportunity to have a nice meal on the house. All this pleased Lucas, who during his time in the police force had had his share of accidents. There had been no emergencies at all, since most of the customers were calm and cultured people. Lucas had seen all kinds of things in his life, but this was the first time he had ever encountered anything like this. At first, he did not want to let the boy into the lobby of the restaurant, but then, after seeing tears in his eyes, he immediately relented and automatically opened the door. And now, standing next to the boy, Lucas was embarrassed and ashamed that for the first time in his years at the restaurant, he had been unable to fulfill his direct duties and take the boy outside. When Ethan saw the scene, he came closer and leaned over the boy and asked sympathetically, "What do you want, kid? Are you lost, or are you hungry?" The boy looked at the man with eyes full of tears and then answered, "I'd like some leftovers from the kitchen." "Not much at all, man. They're going to waste anyway. I've seen the janitor put them in the food waste bin, so maybe I'll get something too." To say the boy's request shocked Ethan was nothing. It was the 21st century, and this kid was asking for kitchen scraps not every caring landlord would feed a dog. And here's a boy. "Are you hungry, little one? That's not a problem at all. Now I'll instruct the chef and he'll cook for you whatever you want. And if you don't have time to wait, then choose from what's available right now. You okay? Can you read? Here. Take the menu and choose whatever you want," Ethan said. He could hardly contain his excitement. Again he looked at the owner and then added quietly, "Not for me, Uncle. For my mother. She's sick. Almost can't get up. The doctors say she needs an operation. And we don't have the money. I earn as much as I can. Begging on the street in general. I also read the paper to blind old Roger in the morning. For this, he gives me 30 rubles at a time. The realization of the boy's words sent Ethan into a state of profound shock. The boy's story struck the restaurant owner to the core. Taking the boy by the hand, he sat him down at the nearest table and asked the waitress to bring him something delicious. Then Ethan sat down across from him and said, "So, would you like to have lunch with me? You'll eat first, and then you can take care of the leftovers, which of course I won't give you." Tears came to the boy's eyes again. "What do you mean you won't give it to me, Uncle? I have to get my mother something to eat, otherwise. I don't agree, and I don't want your lunch." Ethan smiled and, admiring the boy character, hurried to reassure him. "Well, don't jump to conclusions. Don't jump to conclusions. I mean, I won't give you any leftovers from the kitchen. What's your name?" "My name is Ethan." "And I'm Justin," the boy whispered softly. "Well, now we have met," said Ethan, and extended his large hand to the little one. They were eating a delicious cacio soup, prepared in a blazing heat by the restaurant's chef. For the main course, there were French fries, Caesar salad, and pork chop, the size of which made the boy shudder. All this culinary splendor Justin chose himself, proud of the fact that for the first time in his life, he ordered in a real restaurant. With occasional glances at the boy, Ethan was proud that he was able to please him. Deep in his heart, the young businessman dreamed of having children of his own. But in order to have them, he had to get married first. Ethan did not have a steady girlfriend, and in his 28 years he was considered an incorrigible bachelor. There had been affairs in his life, and they had happened quite often. But to nothing definitive, they eventually did not lead. Richard has often criticized his son for this, realizing the importance of family in the life of any man. "You'll get married, have a bunch of kids, and make me a nice present for my old age," said the elderly businessman. "Dad, why do I always have to have a lot of children? Maybe I only want to pay attention to one. You just gave birth to me and stopped there," Ethan answered in a joking tone. "And here you're right, all in color. Those were the times, Ethan, difficult times. And you've got peace and stability now." "I never dreamed of that when I was young," Richard retorted. Ethan had not paid much attention to his father's words then, but now looking at little Justin made him feel very uncomfortable. Of course, the boy couldn't stomach the dishes he'd chosen and confined himself to only sampling a little of each. I haven't eaten so much and deliciously in a long time. Mom, when she wasn't sick. She was a tasty cook, too. Especially pancakes and pancakes and pancakes," Justin said, stroking the visibly rounded tummy with his hand. "Your mom was really good. What about your dad? Did he leave you?" Ethan asked cautiously. "No. I never saw him, and my mom never told me. But I think he was either an astronaut or a pilot." "Why do you think so?" Ethan asked, blotting his lips with a napkin. "Well, it's clear to everyone. Uncle Ethan, you're like a child, by God. If my dad were someone else, he'd be living with us. But he's probably stuck on an abandoned space station, waiting to be picked up. You know how time passes differently in space, right?" "Well, a year and 2, 3, maybe 10 years, Justin answered in a mature way. Ethan's heart clenched treacherously once more. It pained the young businessman to see the 6-year-old trying to explain to himself what his parents really should have been explaining to his son. After ordering him to collect groceries for the boy, Ethan decided to take him home in his car. The reason was not only that the grocery bag was rather bulky, but also that it was inappropriate for a 6-year-old boy to be walking alone in a huge metropolis. When he saw Ethan's fancy SUV, Justin was ready to jump for joy like a little kangaroo. The boy got so excited that his makeshift sash came undone and his pants traitorously crept down. "Oh, an accident," Justin mumbled embarrassedly. Ethan smiled and then caught himself thinking that it would be a good idea to update the boy's closet. Putting the boy in the back seat, the businessman got behind the wheel of his SUV. Justin immediately buried his face against the glass, intending to keep a close eye on the road while driving. Ethan always drove carefully, and this time he was even more careful. He knew that he had a small passenger behind him, and they had to protect him with utmost care. When Ethan saw a children's clothing store on the road, he parked the car on the curb and turned to Justin. "Uncle, where are we going?" "It's a long drive to my house," the boy said. "Oh, come on. Don't be afraid. Let's go to the store and buy you some things. You can't go to the best restaurant in town and look like a waif." Ethan smiled. Justin brightened up when he heard about the new clothes. Frankly, he was tired of his mother's cheap bargain, buying clothes. When he went into the store, Ethan immediately called the saleswoman and explained to her what he wanted to buy for the boy. Soon, Justin had gotten rid of his old clothes and had new jeans, a warm button-down sweater, and good quality shoes that were not even close to his old ones. Wow! He looked so handsome. "He looks like a bridegroom," said the salesgirl with a smile. Knowing that the boy would be in need of a change of clothes, Ethan bought him exactly the same set. "Now we can go to your mother," Ethan said, with a sense of accomplishment. Ethan himself could not explain why he was helping him. In a certain moment, his heart was crushed by the fact that such a wonderful boy lived there who had had to starve and beg for scraps at the restaurant. Ethan had always been a compassionate man and never passed by the underprivileged of this world, helping homeless shelters and orphanages. The young businessman did not expect any special gratitude and did not expect any special gratitude and did not pour in public. All of this came from the heart and was aimed primarily to help, not to satisfy his own ambitions. Ethan didn't know that at this very moment the administrator and part-time right-hand man of the restaurant owner was pouring dirt on him in the eyes of his subordinates. And why had he gotten mixed up with this bum? He fed him, got him drunk. "Let's bring in all the beggars from the street and have a buffet." "All the same, you cannot save all," with the look of an experienced speaker, Victor began. Waitresses gingerly looked at the administrator, knowing full well that it is not necessary to voice their opinions out loud, especially if it runs counter to the boss's. The employees understood that the administrator couldn't say such things to Ethan's eyes, and that's why she behaved so brazenly only in his absence. They were about the same age, but their personalities were as strikingly different as a mouse is different from a cat, and vice versa. Deep down, Victor envied the luckier Ethan, whose father had presented him with such a lucrative business on a silver platter. Victor's parents were alcoholics and could only leave him a pile of debts and an old Khrushchev apartment with no repairs. That is why, getting a job at Ethan's restaurant, he decided to succeed in this particular field, and now deliberately degrading discipline in his absence. Victor, first of all, tried to strengthen his own position. At this very moment, Ethan drove up to the house Justin had indicated. As it turned out, he and his mother lived in a private section located in the suburbs. A quick glance was all the businessman needed to realize that low-income people lived in this shabby house. The chimney had buckled to one side. The paint on the window frames was peeling, and the shingles were old, mossy in places. "Yeah, Justin's mom must be doing really badly," the man thought with a sad sigh. While the boy struggled with the unyielding lock on the front door, Ethan got out of the car with a bag of groceries and things in both hands. Finally, Justin managed to turn the key in the keyhole and went inside. Ethan cautiously followed. The house smelled of medicine, herbal remedies, and something the businessman's sense of smell couldn't identify. "Mom, I'm back, and I brought you something to eat," the boy exclaimed as he crossed the threshold of the hallway. "Thank you, my son. You're the only breadwinner I have left. Just promise not to beg anymore, okay?" A faint female voice came from the back of the room. Ethan hesitated, still unsure of what to do next. He felt uneasy about his unceremonious visit. "Come on, Uncle Ethan. I'll introduce you to your mother. She's nice." The businessman replied with a confused smile and then carefully entered the room. Ethan had expected to see something similar, but what he saw before him stunned him to the core. On the bed lay a thin, sickly, weary woman, whose eyes looked at the world through the prism of pain and despair. Next to the bed was a nightstand, on which all sorts of vials and packages of medicine lined up in a row. Even to a layman, it was clear that the young woman lying on the bed was seriously ill. Ethan had never felt such discomfort in his life. Since the businessman deliberately did not want to embarrass the woman with his presence, he tried not to look her in the face. But when Ethan did meet the landlady, his heart raced. The woman's face seemed painfully familiar to him. The déjà vu effect made him pale and invariably sent a wave of prickly shivers down his spine. "Victoria, is that you? How is that even possible?" exclaimed the businessman and walked over to the bed. But the woman lying on it made surprised eyes and looked at him incomprehensible look. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. My name is Fiona." Ethan flinched and then looked at the woman's face again. "No, it's definitely her. Victoria, the girl from the past." Ethan's consciousness suddenly blurred, as if someone had deliberately forced him to look through a foggy lens. The waves of memory transported the businessman back to the place where he was only 21 and life seemed enchantingly unpredictable. That fall evening he was driving on the highway in his father's Ford and did not even think that in half a kilometer his car would stall and become on the side of the road as a pillar. Ethan was returning from friends who lived in the next town over. They used to meet almost regularly, and this kind of trip was not uncommon. As luck would have it, terrible bad weather broke out, making it almost impossible to dig under the hood during the storm and heavy rain. Engine failure was the force majeure Ethan feared most of all. The track, flooded with muddy currents, looked deserted, which was unspeakably upsetting to the stranded lad. Communication was terrible, and who would want to follow him there in such bad weather? Understanding the hopelessness of his situation, Ethan sat behind the wheel of the stalled car and watched the droplets dripping down the windshield. Suddenly, he turned his head to the right and saw a road sign with the name of a small town or village. Ethan could no longer remember the name, but it was associated with the forest. It was either Sosnovka or Kushtevka. What if I asked the locals for help? It would get dark soon, and then I'd have to spend the night in the car, Ethan thought. It was an easy decision. He had always been a man of action and had never been afraid of trouble. He closed his jacket up to his throat, pulled the hood over his head, and left the comfort of the car. Outside, the rain was already pounding and the wind was shattering, piercing to the bones. Trying not to soak himself in the sticky mud that swarmed the dirt road, Ethan hurried toward the village. No matter how hard he tried, his pants and shoes were still stained with mud. He had to walk about half a kilometer in the pouring rain before he reached the village. Ethan randomly approached the first house he saw and knocked on the window. There was a light on inside, which increased the lad's chances of success. Fortunately, that's exactly how it worked out. Soon there was a distinctive clang of the latch being opened, and a petite girl in her 20s appeared on the threshold. When she saw muddy Ethan in front of her, she gave a little grunt and, without further ado, ushered him into the house. "Are you comfortable with me drubbing in on you like this?" "Don't worry. I'm alone now. My mom's in the hospital, and my sister's in town. I'm taking care of things," she told me serenely. Ethan admired her restraint. Not only had she not been afraid to let a strange man into her house, but she acted as if nothing special had happened. As it turned out later, the girl's name was Victoria, and she was born and raised in this village. After listening to Ethan, the first thing she did was to help him clean up, and then she gave him hot tea. It so happened that that evening, Ethan no longer asked for help in the neighboring yards and stayed in this small, cozy kingdom of peace and quiet. To his sincere surprise, Victoria turned out to be a pleasant companion who could maintain a conversation on almost any topic. So Ethan found out that her younger sister worked as a sales clerk in the district center and that her mother was in the hospital after a stroke. She, on the other hand, stayed on the farm in order to look after the house and feed the livestock. Listening to Victoria's story, Ethan caught himself thinking that living in the city, he knew nothing about the mores of the countryside. He found it interesting that Cool's cow gave twice as much milk this year as she did the year before, or that they should fix the roof because it leaked a little in heavy downpours. Unbeknownst to himself, Ethan experienced unparalleled mental comfort around this fragile and quivering as a young doe girl. That the feelings were mutual, the young people did not even doubt. Ethan and Victoria felt it in their hearts, and the moment they found themselves in each other's arms was not a surprise to them. The young people understood that they might never see each other again, and they betrayed their passion desperately and tenderly. That October night was their first and simultaneously their last date, leaving an indelible mark in their memory. It was a real madness, which lasted only a few hours, and in the morning only crumpled sheets and tired from lack of sleep, eyes of Ethan and Victoria reminded about what had happened the day before. Now, it was difficult to judge what was the reason for their further separation. Maybe it was the fault of Ethan's youth, who couldn't understand people and realized too late that Victoria had been sent to him by fate. After a while, having bumps in an unsuccessful relationship, the young businessman came to his senses and even went to that very village. But the only thing is that he did not find Victoria there. The door and windows of the house were boarded up, and on the fence was chalked out only one, a single word: for sale. Attempts to find Victoria were not successful, and it was unlikely that Ethan was going to put much effort into it. The boy was young and looked forward with the optimism and self-confidence of his age. And now, 7 years after those events, Ethan stood looking at a replica of his beloved Victoria, who had stubbornly resisted the insidious disease. The businessman realized that what he really saw before him was not Victoria, but her younger sister Fiona, who was the spitting image of the girl from the village. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I was mistaken. You look so much like Victoria." "Where is she then?" said Ethan, coughing embarrassedly. Fiona suddenly turned pale and her breathing became hoarse and intermittent. The businessman tensed, knowing full well that he didn't know how to give first aid. Fortunately, Fiona regained consciousness fairly quickly and did not have to be rescued. Gathering her courage, she asked Justin to go into the other room and close the door behind her. Then Fiona looked into Ethan's eyes and said, "Victoria died 6 years ago. Difficult childbirth. Bleeding opened up and the local medicine. Anyway, you know what she's like. Justin's her son. Next thing you know, our mom's gone. Like a son," Ethan exclaimed, trembling with tension. "I couldn't let my dead sister's son end up in an orphanage. She had no husband, so I adopted the baby. Justin doesn't know he's not my son. I hope it stays a mystery to him," Fiona continued with a sad sigh. Even though the room was cool enough, Ethan could feel the heat inside, which made his cheeks flare up like the touch of a red-hot stove. Only now did the businessman realize that by the time he decided to find Victoria, she was probably already dead, since she had no husband. The timeline was Justin. Oh my God, the timeline was Justin could be my son. Ethan's mind raced, making him break out in another round of sticky sweat. "Did you know my dead sister?" Fiona interrupted the lingering pause. Ethan's eyes were already clear of the shroud that had been keeping him awake until now. "Yes, I knew Victoria. Briefly, but I knew her," the businessman said in a shaky voice. Fiona looked intently into Ethan's eyes, which made him uncomfortable. The man felt as if he was being seen through, and his reticence looked ridiculous. To say the least, in order to turn the conversation around, Ethan asked, "What about your health? Is there anything I can do to help?" Fiona lowered her eyes ashamedly and then answered softly, "I have a tumor. I need surgery. Chemo doesn't work. That's why I kept my hair, and I'm sorry for the details. Justin understands. He's trying to help, but how can you raise money for surgery by begging on the street? And I'm A shame that I don't have the strength to look after my son. Well, you have a beautiful son. Take my word for it. He wasn't begging. He was honestly asking for help. Well, I did. I own a restaurant downtown, so I'm in charge of all the food and groceries. Ethan tried to smooth over the awkward situation. Fiona sighed sadly and tried to get into a more comfortable position in bed. She looked pained but made no sign of it and never once mentioned it in her conversation. From time to time, Ethan glanced at the lady of the house and wondered how much she resembled her older sister Victoria. The same silky curls, the dimpled chin, and the noble shape of her face, like a born aristocrat, Ethan once again admired. For himself, the businessman had already made up his mind. Feeling guilty before the late Victoria, Ethan, at all costs, wanted to save her sister. Let him. I'll sell the car, the house, and even the restaurant if necessary. But I'll help Fiona and my little son Justin, the man thought to himself. After saying goodbye to Fiona and her adopted son, Ethan left the house and drove to the restaurant. The businessman couldn't wait to find out exactly how much money he could withdraw to pay for Fiona's surgery. The receptionist greeted the boss unfriendly. It was obvious that Victor wanted to tell him another quip, but he restrained himself and played his behind. The scenes game. How are the losses, Victor? Are they sorted out? I don't like this situation at all. It reeks of betrayal. But we're all friends. No one to think about, he asked in a businesslike manner. I don't know, boss. Everything seems to be the same. Same proven suppliers, good quality products. Customers are satisfied. And there are problems, Victor answered, looking ingratiatingly into his eyes. Ethan sensed that there was something wrong with the administrator, but he did not have the time or the energy to solve it once and for all. At the moment, the most important thing was the health of Fiona, who in the near future might need medical attention. Without delaying matters, Ethan immediately called a clinic specializing in this very kind of disease, which had been diagnosed to Justin's mother. But when the businessman found out the amount of money he needed to raise, sadness and anxiety showed on his face. To say that there was a lot of money required was to say nothing. The sum was astronomical, which in turn upset Ethan. The businessman knew that he would not give up on his goal and would go all the way, whatever it cost him. As a last resort, he could borrow part of the sum from his father. He always kept a certain amount in the bank as a safety net. Of course, I would have to explain why I needed the money, but that's okay, I'll get out of it. That's the 10th thing, Ethan thought to himself. Unfortunately, the young businessman was not even aware that he had made one unfortunate mistake in his conclusions. And it was expressed in the first place that it was voiced to the administrator, Victor. The cunning rascal immediately realized that the boss was in trouble and had to spend an enriched sum of money with several zeros, the amount of which could drive anyone crazy. Upon learning of this, Victor saw an opportunity not only to punish the restaurant owner, but also to make him on the verge of bankruptcy. The administrator realized that in order for Ethan to be able to pay for the operation of the mother of this beggar, he needed to raise a tidy sum, which could be a nice help to start his own business. Victor had the right people. It remained only to know where and when he could catch this rich man rushing to help some sick slum beggar. While the unsuspecting Ethan was collecting money, his administrator was developing a plan of robbery. Victor did not care that the money was intended for a very important case, the importance of which was difficult to overestimate. But Ethan's head at this moment was filled with very different thoughts. More than anything, the young businessman wanted to understand, was Justin really his son? Or was it a fatal coincidence? To find out, the businessman needed a hair from Justin's head that he hadn't even noticed he'd lost. Recently, the boy dined only at Uncle Ethan's restaurant and was unspeakably happy that the staff perceived him as an adult. Most of all, Justin liked the carcho soup, which the owner of the place served him on the first day they met. Knowing the boy's cravings, Ethan always prepared something unusual for him. Despite the fact that the money for the operation was collected slowly, Ethan was sure that he would be able to meet the deadline. And at the same time, Victor was already preparing a gang of robbers to rob and then eliminate his boss. He knew that if the action was successful, the strings would never lead to the customer, who by the time of the climax would be lounging under the gentle sun of one of the resorts of the South. Everything had been thought out in detail, and Victor only waited for the day when the businessman would pile up the money and go to the bank to pay for the operation of the boy's mother. Borrowing money from his father, Ethan realized, to his great joy, that he had finally collected the amount he was looking for. It only remained for him to wire the money to the details of the clinic, and then at least one of the most urgent problems would be solved. Ethan decided to go to the medical center with Justin. During this time, he had become so attached to the boy that even before the results of the DNA test were announced, he thought of him as his own son. Once again counting the money in his office, Ethan walked with Justin to the car parked in the parking lot. At the door, he ran into Victor, the manager, who for some inexplicable reason suddenly began to utter nonsense about the beef from the last shipment. Supposedly, it was of very low quality. Victor: "Let's do it another time, huh? Not now. I'm in a hurry, and I don't have time to go over these nuances with you. Especially since the chef approved everything. How can there be any complaints?" answered Ethan irritably. But he hardly knew that Victor was simply stalling to give time for his accomplices to arrive at the place. They should have attacked Ethan when he got into the car. The place was rather deserted despite the abundance of parked cars. Clutching a small leather briefcase with money under his arm, Ethan went into the parking lot. Next to him was Justin, who was so happy to be with this grown-up uncle who was collecting money to help his sick mother. Ethan had only about 50 feet to walk to the salvageable interior of the car when, out of nowhere, two young men in masks appeared. He was in the middle of the car, and the businessman felt the mortal danger emanating from the knife. One of them made a sharp lunge at him. Justin immediately shouted, disorienting the attackers for a moment. Frankly, they hadn't expected a child to be near the object of the robbery. That split second was just enough time for Ethan to hand the briefcase with the money to Justin and take the hit. "Run, run, Justin," shouted the businessman, trying to apprehend the robbers at any cost. And Justin ran like he had never run before. Maneuvering between the cars standing in the parking lot, the boy ran toward the security point where the guard was supposed to be. The robbers were confused. Attacking a businessman with no money now made no sense. It was almost impossible to catch up with the boy, as he had already reached the guard post and stormed inside. The retired officer, who was dozing in his chair, did not immediately understand what was going on, but according to his long-established army habit, he tried to react adequately to the boy's signal, calling the police and an ambulance at the same time. The man took his truncheon and went out into the street. And there, the two scoundrels had already tried to take out their powerless anger on Ethan. To their surprise, the businessman turned out to be strong in spirit and did not give up in the face of mortal danger. They fought to the death. At one point, the raiders wanted to flee, but the retired businessman stunned one of the bandits with a powerful blow of his truncheon and set the other one on a traumatic gun, which from the outside looked like an exact copy of the weapon. Somewhere in the distance, the sirens of an ambulance were heard, followed by a reinforced police squad. Although he was badly injured himself, Ethan was conscious and felt the greatest concern for Justin, who had saved him from certain death by his decisive action. Because the businessman was shot in the leg, he had to be hospitalized, and Justin was sent home to his mother. Even though the wound was not serious, it still required expert treatment. Under medical supervision, Ethan visibly relaxed and, after a shot of sedatives, fell into a sticky, anxious sleep. He dreamt of bandits, money flying through the air, and of course Jine, who insistently called his name. When Ethan opened his eyes, he did indeed see the boy in front of him, with Richard standing beside him. "How are you, son?" "Easy." "That's good. That's quite a snake you've got there. Victor, your administrator. He's the one who arranged the assassination attempt on you. As soon as his accomplices got to the station, they came clean, gave up the boss, my father said. Victor? Is he a traitor? It just cannot be. We've been together for years, Ethan whispered. Yes, Victor. He's looked up to you, jealous. There's also a personal motive involved. His father used to work in my restaurant as a doorman, but then he started begging for tips and wasted it on vodka. He got drunk, and I had to fire him, and I suggested he get treatment for his alcoholism. Ethan went pale. Such details even he did not know. It turns out that Victor had not only been digging under him all this time, but also had a personal score. After all, only they say that the son is not responsible for his father. In fact, everything was very different. Sighing sadly, Ethan winced at the pain in his sore thigh and looked at Justin. The boy held in his hand a sheet of paper with many stamps and signatures. There was a happy smile in Justin's face. Hi, Daddy. I'm sorry I was wrong. You're not a pilot or even an astronaut. You're much better than that. You're a restaurateur, the boy exclaimed happily. Ethan looked over at his father in surprise and realized he knew everything. Well, what did you think, son? So much for the mysteries of the court of Madrid. Didn't you do a paternity test? I know I did. Well, while you were in the hospital, the answer came to our home address. You're not much of a conspirator. But thank you for your grandson. He looks just like you. I remember, Richard said with a smile. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. They were so sincere that the father standing in front of him felt proud that he had raised such a son. What about Fiona? The money for the surgery, Ethan faltered. Fiona's fine, son. I've taken personal control of the case. Yesterday she underwent surgery. Specialists say it was a success. The money's been transferred to the clinic. So we made it in time. My father hurried to reassure Ethan. Lying on a hospital bed, the young businessman could not believe that in such a short time his life had changed beyond recognition. Not long ago, he was an ordinary bachelor, forging money in his restaurant. And now, he not only became a father, but also revealed a hidden enemy who had been digging under the owner of the institution for years. As it turned out a little later, it was because of Victor's sabotage that the restaurant was making losses that had never happened before. He deliberately purchased products at a low price so that the quality of dishes became much worse. In addition, Victor siphoned money from the cash register from time to time, so that the restaurant's income remained steadily low. Now that he had his son and his all-powerful father by his side, Ethan was on the mend quickly. At the same time, Fiona was taking her first timid steps into her new pain and suffering, free life. To a woman tormented by lingering illness, it all seemed like a fairy tale dream that would dissolve into a ghostly haze at the same time as the first rays of the sun. But in fact, it was a reality. It had been suffered and watered with the bitter tears of the heroes of this amazing story. Ethan had been discharged from the hospital before Fiona and was looking forward to the day when he could meet her with a bouquet of roses on the steps of the clinic. Everything he had been foolish enough to give to Victoria, the businessman intended to give to her younger sister. In the meantime, Ethan had already managed to visit Justin's late mother and apologize to her. Kneeling on his knees, Ethan stroked the tombstone, whitened by time and winds, behind which rested the body of the woman who had given him a son and the meaning of life. The old caretaker of the cemetery shook his head understandingly and tried not to disturb his visitor in a moment of emotional grief and sorrow. Forgive me, Victoria. I was a self-righteous fool for whom the attention of such a beautiful woman as you flattered my ego and nothing more. But now I know that it wasn't all for nothing, do you hear? I swear to you that from now on, our son Justin and Fiona will never need anything ever again. Forgive me if you can, Ethan whispered as he rose from his knees. At that moment, out of the dark October clouds, the bright sun suddenly peeked out and covered Ethan with its bright rays like a blanket. The businessman realized that it was Victoria, thus sending him a sign that she did not hold a grudge, and blessed him for a further happy life. About a week later, Fiona was discharged from the clinic and, to the thunderous applause of the medical staff, left on her own feet. And at the exit, she was already welcomed by Ethan. Justin, and Richard, for whom the girl had become family and friends. Ahead of them awaited a new life, in which there will be no place for lies and deceit, and love and sincere feelings will be a solid foundation for this strong and friendly family.